My daughter's best friend accused me of something, and my daughter didn't even believe me. They immediately called the police and took me in for questioning. I'm Mike, 41, and I've been a single dad to my 16-year-old daughter Lauren since she was just a kid. I'll be honest, I never expected to find myself in this situation, trying to untangle myself from something as messed up as what I'm about to tell you. I've spent years raising Lauren, and we built a pretty strong father-daughter relationship. I thought I was a decent parent, though never perfect. That said, what happened recently turned my world upside down in a way I never thought possible. It all started one Friday evening when Lauren asked if her friend Kelly could stay the night. I'd met Kelly a couple of times, mostly in passing. She seemed like a typical teenager, friendly enough, though maybe a little too bold at times. But I trusted Lauren's judgment, so I didn't think twice about saying yes. I figured they'd watch some movies, talk about school drama, maybe sneak a few snacks past midnight. Nothing unusual, right? Lauren and Kelly spent most of the evening hanging out in Lauren's room, laughing and making noise, the way teenagers do. Around midnight, I went to check on them, mostly just to tell them to keep it down since I had work early the next day. When I knocked and peeked in, they were both sitting cross-legged on the bed, phones in hand. They just waved me off, laughing and rolling their eyes like I was the world's biggest annoyance. It was normal, so I left them to it. After a while, I went to bed, figuring that was the end of it. At some point in the early morning, maybe around 2 a.m., I woke up and thought I heard someone moving around downstairs. I assumed it was Lauren getting a glass of water or something, but just to be sure, I got up and headed to the kitchen. When I got there, I was surprised to see Kelly standing by the fridge. She was dressed in one of those oversized t-shirts that teenagers seem to live in, looking slightly nervous when she noticed me. Hey, couldn't sleep? I asked, trying to keep things casual. Kelly shrugged, giving me a small, shy smile. Yeah, I guess. Sorry if I woke you up, she said. I shook my head, saying it was fine, but then something about her demeanor struck me as odd. She lingered a little longer than I expected, just standing there in a dimly lit kitchen. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but there was this look in her eyes, kind of a focus or intensity that felt out of place. Is everything all right? I asked. She hesitated for a moment, biting her lip in a way that felt almost too deliberate. Then, to my utter shock, she stepped forward, closing the space between us. Before I could fully process what was happening, she reached out, brushing her hand over my arm and leaned in, her face alarmingly close to mine. Kelly, what are you doing? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, trying to keep calm, even though my mind was racing. She looked up at me, her expression shifting from hesitant to almost determined. Then she leaned in even closer, her hand sliding up my arm. I pulled back immediately, raising both hands in a defensive gesture. Kelly, this is completely inappropriate, I said, stepping away from her, my tone sharper than I'd intended. She stared at me, and for a second, I saw something flash across her face. Anger, maybe hurt. It was hard to tell. She quickly dropped her gaze, mumbled a soft sorry, and shuffled back toward Lauren's room without another word. I stood there in shock for a long moment, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. Eventually, I went back to bed, convinced it was some weird, misguided attempt at I don't even know what. I chalked it up to teenage confusion, hormones, or something I didn't understand. But I was certain that it was over, or so I thought. The next morning, things were tense. I could feel it hanging in the air between me and Kelly. Even though she barely made eye contact with me, she left pretty early, mumbling a quick goodbye to Lauren without looking my way. I felt relieved, figuring that she was just embarrassed, and that would be the end of it. A few days later, everything came crashing down. I was in the middle of a routine day at work when my phone started buzzing nonstop. Texts from Lauren, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and a voicemail from the school counselor, all demanding my immediate attention. I felt a pit form in my stomach as I listened to the voicemail. Apparently, Kelly had accused me of inappropriate behavior. I could barely believe it. The words felt surreal, echoing in my ears as I tried to process what I was hearing. I kept thinking, this can't be happening, but it was. I raced home, my mind in a complete frenzy. Lauren was in her room, crying, refusing to look at me. She'd heard from Kelly and was upset, angry, confused, everything, all directed at me. It was like a nightmare. Dad, how could you? She asked, her voice breaking. I tried to explain, to tell her what really happened, but she was barely listening. Kelly had told everyone her version of the story, painting me as some kind of predator who had made a move on her in the middle of the night. She claimed I had tried to kiss her, that I'd made her uncomfortable, that I'd crossed every line. And because she was Lauren's friend, Lauren believed her without question. I spent hours trying to explain to Lauren, telling her exactly what happened. I could see how much she wanted to believe me, but Kelly was her friend, and the doubt lingered in her eyes. It hurt more than I could put into words, knowing that my own daughter thought I might be capable of something so vile. Then things escalated further. The school got involved, and suddenly it wasn't just between me, Lauren, and Kelly. I was getting calls from other parents, some of whom I barely knew, questioning me, subtly accusing me, and hinting that they'd heard things. Word had spread fast, and the story seemed to grow with each telling. Days turned into weeks, and I felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. Parents in the neighborhood started avoiding me. People who used to wave or nod in my direction acted like they didn't even see me anymore. It was like a dark cloud had settled over my life, and there was no way to shake it off. I decided to reach out to Kelly's parents, hoping that they might understand. I thought if I could just explain to them, maybe they could talk to Kelly, maybe even get her to tell the truth. But when I tried, they slammed the door in my face. They didn't want to hear it. They believed their daughter, and to them, that was the end of it. I felt completely isolated. Lauren was distant, barely speaking to me except when absolutely necessary. She kept saying she didn't know who to believe, but I could tell she was leaning toward Kelly. A few days after the accusations started circulating, I got a call from the police. They wanted me to come down to the station for a conversation, but I knew what that meant. My heart sank, but I went. There was no choice. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't run from it. I walked into that station, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. A part of me still couldn't believe this was real, but another part knew I had to face it. Had to clear my name somehow. They led me into an interview room, sterile and gray, with a single table and 2 chairs. The detective assigned to my case introduced himself as Detective Harris. He was an older man, looked tired, like he'd been through this 1,000 times. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, feeling my palms start to sweat as he sat across from me, studying me in that way only cops do. "All right, Mike," he began, his voice calm, almost gentle. "We've had a serious allegation made against you. I'm sure you're aware of it." I nodded, feeling my throat go dry. "I know what's being said, but it's not true. Kelly, she made it all up. I swear to you, Detective, I didn't do anything to her. I told her to back off when she tried to get close to me. That's all." Detective Harris listened, his expression unreadable. He nodded slowly, taking notes as I talked, asking a few questions here and there. How well did I know Kelly? Had there ever been any other incidents? Did I have a history of anything remotely inappropriate? He was careful with his words, but I could tell he was searching for something, some crack, some inconsistency. I felt sick under his gaze, like I was guilty just by sitting there. As I answered each question, telling him every detail I could remember, it became clear that Lauren had already sided with Kelly. She'd apparently spoken to the police, backing up Kelly's story. My own daughter believed that I was some kind of predator. The realization hit me hard, a weight settling deep in my chest. Lauren had looked me in the eye just days ago and chosen to believe her friend over me, her own father. Detective Harris eventually closed his notebook and looked at me with something almost like sympathy. "Mike, I have to tell you something," he said, his voice softening. "This isn't easy, but the evidence doesn't lie. We've been talking to people who know Kelly, and it seems there's a lot more going on here than what you've been told." I stared at him confused. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave me a look that felt almost like pity. Then he spoke the words that changed everything. "I think you're not the one who needs to be worried.